A strange spiralling white light was spotted in the early morning sky over Sydney, with even sceptical witnesses wondering if it was a UFO.
They were last seen on the beach with a tall man, and that's the best description police have ever had of him.
More than 17 years after Harold Holt disappeared into raging surf at Cheviot Beach, his widow has finally revealed his last romantic words.
Shocking, terrifying, mesmerising. That's the way a number of Australians have described their alleged encounter with the Yowie.
It's time for the Weird Crap in Australia podcast.
Welcome to the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Soul. Allow me to introduce my co-host, Holly Soul, the researcher extraordinaire herself.
Hey, everybody.
Now, as you can hear, we seem maybe a little bit more better at this than subsequent episodes are going to sound of the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. And the reason for that is that we first started doing this podcast 4 years ago. Since those 4 years have gone, we've gotten better at our jobs, we've got better technology, everything works a little bit better, and we even know how to research better, which is something that we didn't do back in the day. So we felt that the introduction to the Weird Crap in Australia podcast should be a little bit more indicative of where standards are today. Recently, Holly and myself re-listened to episode 1, The Disappearance of Harold Holt, and we were, as you could imagine, absolutely horrified by what we heard. Poor audio quality, the research wasn't quite there, and there was also a lot of rambling bullshit.
There's still going to be some of that.
There's definitely going to be some rambling bullshit. So we thought what might be a great idea is if we revisit essentially the disappearance of Harold Holt in this brand new episode 0. We're going to use our book, Weird Crap in Australia Volume 1, as the basis for this episode, which did expand on the research that was in episode 1. And we're going to take another shot at introducing ourselves. So, first and foremost, my name is Matthew Soul. I've inadvertently become one of Australia's more infamous social historians. My background is, well, it's a myriad of things, as like most people in my generation. I have worked in basic labouring, where I've put together door calls. I've worked on construction sites. I've worked in the media, both as an advertising account manager, sometime advertorial writer, and I did a stint as a radio announcer. Since then, I have worked in retail in various management positions. Unfortunately, the retail game is not that fun, but I've always had an interest in a couple of different things, those being paranormal stories and being generally stories about serial killers and psychopaths. Australia has plenty of both, so I thought, hey, let's put together a podcast called Weird Shit in Australia. Now, you may be listening to this right now and going, Matthew, it's not called Weird Shit in Australia. The reason that it's called Weird Crap in Australia is because we couldn't get it past the iTunes directory. And that's essentially how we arrived at where we are today. Now, the Weird Crap in Australia podcast is a series of different tales of weird history, paranormal activity, murderers, psychopaths, aliens, pop culture, and what we like to think of as a lot of fun. Now, before I go on too much longer, allow me to introduce properly the co-host, the researcher of the podcast, and my lovely life partner and wife, Holly Soul.
I was a bit worried he was actually going to not give me an introduction for a second then, because he does actually like to talk a little bit. He's looking at me like that, yeah.
And also because you get terrified of introducing yourself and talking about yourself.
I want to have a chance.
I expect this to go for about 35 seconds before you start blushing.
I'm definitely not just going to start reading off my intro in the book. Hey guys, my name is Holly Soul. I started off this series as Holly Hunt just because it was easier, and that's how Matthew knew me. So if you go back to episode 1, maybe through to 10, that's probably how he'll introduce me.
Yes, we weren't married when we first started.
We were married because we'd been married for a couple of years, but you'd been so used to calling me Holly Hunt, you were still in that.
And you were that was still your writing pen name at the time. And you were doing another podcast which was called Beyond the Words. You can check that out. That's actually a complete series.
I thought I was doing my intro.
Sorry, I didn't look at and now you understand exactly how the show is going to go.
So I started off my writing career writing really bad pulp fiction books. I have done a university degree and a Bachelor of Arts, which means I know how to research stuff, write an essay, and then get someone else to look over it, so it actually makes sense.
That being me.
Nowadays it is, yeah. I've since moved on to writing Weird Crap in Australia books while I do my pulp fiction ones, and I work retail as well. So I also have customer assistance and being able to tell you how much I love you while also thinking I want to kill you.
And Holly also forgot to mention, of course, that part of her Bachelor of Arts was in historical site management and preservation.
Cultural heritage management. That's what it was. And for my big project, I actually did a preservation plan for oral history, which we actually used as a basis for one of these episodes.
So basically combining a little bit of radio showmanship, some media experience, and a actual education, being Holly,
Paid for.
we started to develop the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. And again, to our surprise, it's led to a very interesting little journey. So we're not going to get rid of episode 1. But this is going to serve as a brand new introduction to the world of Weird Crap in Australia. So listen to this, see how we've done, and then compare it to the very next episode. And I'm sure you will be absolutely horrified about what we thought was quality. Now, the episode that you will listen to following this one, if you do so choose to listen to that episode, that particular episode was recorded probably on a very, very the method that we used was not great.
No.
What we would do is we'd actually Skype call each other from different rooms in the house, and we would record the local recording to our personal computers, and then we would attempt to sync it all up. Since then, we actually have a soundboard, microphones,
editor,
and our wonderful editor, Blake Kell. Blake Kell joined us relatively soon in the life of Weird Crap in Australia, and that's when things started to improve.
Generally because he went, oh, what is this shit? I need to fix it.
Yes, he recognized the content was good, but maybe the audio quality wasn't great. So we have since transitioned into better technologies and things like that. But we didn't want to just disappear that episode because for us it's special. It demonstrates exactly where we were all the way back when we first embarked on this little mission. But we also kind of don't want it to remain as as the start of this series because we feel that the series is worth a little bit more than that very first episode. So that's who we are. And without further ado, we are now going to revisit the subject of episode 1, and that is the disappearance of Australia's Prime Minister, Harold Holt. Take it away, Holly.
1967 Australia found itself in the grip of a national first. The unspeakable occurred, and our leader, the Prime Minister of Australia, vanished. Such an event had never occurred before, and the country was immediately flung into a constitutional crisis. But what happened on that beach in 1967, and how could the people of the time allow their leader to recklessly endanger his own life? Was it a freak accident brought on by arrogance, or was there something far more sinister?
You have to understand just how strange this was. To have a leader disappear for no reason. And it essentially created this sort of crazy constitutional panic that we are going to discuss a little bit more. And I might add it just as well as we're chewing through this, we're using the first chapter not the first chapter actually. What chapter is this? It is
chapter 9.
This is chapter 9 in the section Weird History in our first book, Weird Crap in Australia, Volume 1. So we're going to be reading from that.
Harold Edward Holt was born December 5, 1908, in Sydney, New South Wales, but moved to Melbourne, Victoria at a young age with his family. Holt's ministership was incredibly symbolic to the people of Australia, as he was the first Prime Minister born within the Commonwealth of Australia.
For most people who don't know, Australia essentially formed as a loose grouping of colonies. We discussed that in episode 100 of the podcast, where we discussed Australian Federation. But essentially, he was symbolic because he was the first native-born Australian to lead the country. He wasn't from Britain.
British. He wasn't New South Welshman. He was Australian. Holt studied law at the University of Melbourne and, with his degree in hand, opened his own legal practice. In 1935, Holt stood for election under the United Australia Party, not to be confused with Clive Palmer's bullshit.
Yeah, so there is currently a political party called the United Palmer Party, the UPN. That is not this party. This party would later go on to become the Liberal Party.
Yes.
In Australia.
It would be later reformed.
Later reformed. But yeah, so don't get confused with modern politics on that one.
In the 35 election, he won the seat of Fawkner. He joined the cabinet when Menzies became Prime Minister in 1939 at the outbreak of World War II. Holt worked on and off in the cabinet as he was a serving member of the Australian Army during the war. The back and forth of his political life came to an end when he was recalled from his time in service after an airplane accident killed 3 members of Parliament at the head of the army in August 1940. We later revisit that in a different episode.
Yes, and it also, it led to a couple of hauntings, which are not actually too far away from where we live right now. Crazily enough, Holly, it's only literally like 5 minutes down the road. We could go and go check out some of those ghosts. Some people say that fiery headless corpses wander the bush throughout the evenings around Canberra.
It's episode 177 if you're interested. By the time the United Australia Party government was ousted in the 1941 general election, Holt served under 2 prime ministers, Robert Menzies and Arthur Fadden. Holt joined the new Liberal Party upon its formation in 1945, continuing his time in Parliament. When Robert Menzies returned to the Prime Ministership after the 1949 election, Holt was offered the role of Minister for Immigration, which he held from 1949 to 1956, where he expanded on post-war immigration schemes beyond Europeans and relaxed the White Australia policy. At the same time, he worked as Minister for Labour and National Service, which he held from 1949 to 1958, where he worked with unions to solve several industrial relations disputes and ease industrial actions taking place. In 1956, Holt was elected Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, and in 1958 replaced Arthur Fadden as Treasurer. Once in that position, he oversaw the transition of the Australian pound to the Australian dollar.
And as you can imagine, folks, this caused a lot of controversy at the time because people generally don't like to change. So the fact that they now had to understand a new decimal currency really, really upset everyone. But it did have prospective coin enthusiasts very, very excited as they started hoarding the old classic money, knowing full well that coin collections in the future could be worth a little bit of profit.
And the round silver 50-cent pieces.
Yes, absolutely.
They hoarded those as well.
Which are now worthless because of eBay.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of these coins that people saved are pretty worthless due to eBay. In our cupboard alone, we have pennies and threepences and sixpence and all that sort of stuff.
They're worth more as silver.
Yes.
At the same time, a credit crunch rolled through the Australian economy. The blame fell squarely on his shoulders as he held the Treasurer portfolio at the time. This credit squeeze was known in time as Holt's Jolt, which is probably how Holt would have been remembered were he less enthusiastic about swimming. Nevertheless, Holt persevered throughout the small credit crunch, and so did the economy. When Menzies retired in 1966, Harold Holt was elected leader of the Liberal Party unopposed, and thanks to the Australian political system, this secured him the role of Prime Minister.
Now, for our international listeners who are tuning in, Australia works under the Commonwealth system, which is based on the British parliamentary system, the Westminster system. Exactly the same thing happens in Canada. So what happens is you're not voting directly for your leader, you're voting for your party, who has an elected leader. So in Australia, our 2 main parties are the Labor Party, which are considered the left or progressive party, and you have the Liberal Party, which is considered the right or conservative party. Though that being said, people generally vote for the leader anyway. They just don't technically get to vote directly for the leader, more like their local representatives and state representatives and so on and so forth.
He won an election later that year and took that as permission from the Australian people to continue dismantling the White Australia policy, amending the Constitution to allow the federal government the responsibility of the welfare of the Indigenous population, and finish the implementation of our currency decimalisation. However, despite his move towards social progressiveness, Holt's prime ministership lost some of its splendour when Holt began promoting greater interest in Asia on Australia's behalf and expanded our involvement in the Vietnam War in an effort to maintain close ties with the United States.
And the reason that people got very upset with the idea of expanding our involvement in the Vietnam War because Australian servicemen were being conscripted. That meant that it would be illegal not to participate in that war. That war was also seen as Americans' war and not ours. And on top of that, it was also leading to a refugee crisis, which Australia actually handled relatively well. But it was just seen as a war that was not our problem to deal with, that was not, we didn't start that war, and so it caused a lot of problems.
Harold Holt laboured a personal passion for the sport of swimming. As such, he was allowed to visit Cheviot Beach near the army base along the Victorian coast in whatever conditions he met, regardless of his own personal safety. Harold Holt was issued a special pass to use the beach down the hill from the army training ground, something which not any layman can acquire.
He knows these waters very well. He comes down here most weekends. I would say that this was no different from any weekend. Mr. Eggleton said it was not at all unusual for Mr. Holt to go swimming at Portsea without a bodyguard in attendance. That's a quote from Jewellery, 1967. And we will do that through our episodes. We'll often quote historical newspapers and articles and television programs, news, and I generally get to do a funny voice while I do it.
Yes, a favourite is apparently Major Meredith from the Emu War. So
Get ready for that one.
Cheviot Beach was named after the SS Cheviot, which broke up on the rocks nearby and sank with the loss of 35 lives on October 20, 1887. Cheviot Beach is a restricted area, initially used for quarantine and then later as a defence cadet training area, where they trained in the strong tides and surrounding hills. The public can no longer access the beach as it remains prohibited to swim for safety reasons.
And maybe they should have had that warning before a certain Prime Minister decided to use it as his personal swimming spot. Just saying.
Surf Life Saving Australia rates it as extremely hazardous for swimming. At high tide...
Now, what possible incident could have occurred, Holly, in the past that would make them signpost that with such hazardous warnings?
The breakup of the ship, obviously.
Obviously.
At high tide, the rocks and reefs that lie immediately off the beach are impossible to see, which can lead to accidents. As the tide falls, strong permanent rips intensify throughout the area as the water drains away around those obstacles. On September 1967, mere months before his disappearance, Holt suffered a reoccurrence of a shoulder injury and his doctor requested he not swim or play tennis until it healed. He was told to rest for 3 to 6 months in an effort to prevent a prolonged healing period.
And just like most men, Australian men of that era, they absolutely listened to their doctor's advice, or they didn't.
Fuck that, I'm a man. I can go back to swimming whenever I want.
Hey, man, I do the voices, and that was horrible.
Yeah, that's what I got. On December 17, 1967, Harold Holt, his neighbour and rumoured lover Marjorie Gillespie, her daughter Vina, Vina's boyfriend Martin Simpson, and Gillespie family friend Alan Stewart decided that they wanted to watch Alec Rose and his yacht pass through the Rip landmark on his attempt to solo circumnavigate the globe.
Now, you may be thinking, isn't it a little bit weird that you bring your mistress along to a family outing? Well, look, families in higher up power kind of have open secrets.
They're a bit complicated.
One of the most famous instances of this is one of Australia's most beloved prime ministers, Bob Hawke, who happened to be having affairs all the time.
Most of the time.
He had a wife, he had a second wife, he cheated on both of them all the time, but he can also drink a beer really fast. So,
That's what Australia cared about.
That's what Australians cared about at the time.
On the way back from the Rip, Holt convinced the group to go to the beach to cool off due to the extreme heat of the Australian summer. The party arrived at Cheviot Beach around noon, where they set themselves up to enjoy the afternoon. In spite of his tender shoulder, Holt decided to go for a swim, and only Stewart joined him in the surf. The conditions were a little choppy, but not enough to worry Holt. While Stewart stayed in the shallows, Holt swam away out into the waves. After a few minutes, he disappeared from view completely. The party raised the alarm as soon as they realised they could no longer see him. the military base mobilised, with Navy divers, the Royal Australian Air Force, helicopters, army personnel and police converging on the beach to search for the missing Prime Minister. In spite of their best effort, no trace of Holt has ever been found.
The Anglican Primate of Australia... Primate?
Yep,
Is that the way to pronounce that word?
as far as I know.
Get prepared for lots of mispronunciations, folks. Archbishop P.N.W. Strong said in Brisbane, "On behalf of the Church of England in Australia, I voice a deep sense of sorrow and dismay at the tragedy which has befallen our nation so suddenly, and deepest sympathy with Mrs. Holt, the members of the Prime Minister's family, his colleagues, the Cabinet, and indeed with the whole nation. If in fact Mr. Holt is dead, the nation and the world have suffered an irreparable loss. It is impossible to calculate what the loss of Mr. Holt will mean to Australia at this juncture of our history."
And that comes from Menzies, A Terrible Tragedy, 1967. 2 days later, Parliament announced Holt was presumed dead, and the Governor-General swore in John McEwen as caretaker Prime Minister until the Liberal Party had a chance to elect a new leader. No federal inquiry into Holt's death was conducted, on the grounds that it would be a waste of time and taxpayers' money. Victorian law at the time didn't provide a mechanism for reporting presumed or suspected deaths to the coroner, which meant a true verdict could not be made on the matter. A 108-page report was submitted to Parliament by police, including witness statements and accounts of all efforts undertaken in the search, in an effort to keep Parliament functioning and informed of any progress. Nigel Bowen sent Governor-General Baron Richard Casey a letter the day Holt disappeared, outlining the actions that could be implemented under 3 specific circumstances: if Holt's body was found, if he was found alive, and if he wasn't found at all. Casey used a very underutilised part of his constitutional power to seek that Holt was officially removed from the office of Prime Minister and raised Deputy Prime Minister John McEwen in his stead. Casey outlined his reasonings to everyone's satisfaction, as well as the capacity of McEwen's powers, namely that the Deputy Prime Minister would have to step in and run the country, as though Holt was simply overseas on diplomatic excursion, until a party room meeting could be scheduled.
Yeah, so this was a problem, and the reason it was a problem is because it was always assumed that a Prime Minister would actually see their term through. The problem here is actually quite interesting because no one at that time who, when they were putting together the Constitution, thought for a minute that a Prime Minister may not live through their term.
No, what they didn't realise was that someone would go missing. They made rules for dying in office. They didn't make rules for disappearing in office.
Yes. The problem is no body, no death. And that is an infamous rule that it sort of goes across all jurisdictions, America and Britain. It's really hard to prosecute a murder case without a body. It's really hard to say that, the Prime Minister has died when you don't have a body to absolutely confirm it, because there is always the outside possibility that maybe the leader of the country absconded from his duties.
Or he'll wash up on a beach in 6 months' time with amnesia and not know who he was.
Yeah.
Like many movie plots.
Yeah, absolutely.
A Prime Minister going missing had never happened before in Australia. There was no precedent for the action Parliament had to take. While the death in office was an event with finality and established precedents, something Parliament could easily plan for, the idea that the Prime Minister could just vanish one day never crossed lawmakers' minds. The fact that Holt only disappeared meant that he could still walk out of the surf one day to retake his office. There wasn't a definitive ending to his prime ministership as required by the Constitution. The Victorian law relating to the reporting of a cause of death was changed in 1985. In 2003, the Victoria Missing Persons Unit formally reopened 161 drowning no-body cases. The case of Harold Holt was amongst them, and his son Nicholas lamented that after 37 years, there were few surviving witnesses and no new evidence that could be presented to the court to explain what happened to his father.
It's crazy to think that something that occurred so far in our past is only resolved so close in our recent past. The fact that this remained not open but not concluded all the way till 2013 really speaks to how slowly the gears of the court system can sometimes move, because you think they would have sort of wrapped this up within, let's be generous and say, a 5 or 10 year period.
2003, not 2013.
Oh, sorry.
That will happen a lot too. On September 2nd, 2005, the coroner found Holt drowned under accidental circumstances in 1967. If he hadn't disappeared into the surf that day, then at the time of this declaration, Harold Holt would have been just short of 97 years old.
Yeah, so they finally ruled on this nearly 40 years after the fact.
Like the vast majority of cases associated with stranger circumstances, many theories were postulated to explain the disappearance of Harold Holt. It is the opinion of the writers that if Holt wasn't the Prime Minister, his death would simply be accepted as a drowning.
Absolutely. See, the problem here is that you have a very important man, and the idea is that your leader should never, I go to say this, obviously recent history would prove me wrong, but a Prime Minister should never disappear, especially during a time of crisis. I say with a massive fucking grin on my face.
He didn't disappear. We knew exactly where he was.
This is true. We did know where he went. But yeah, the idea that this could happen, I think it sort of pushes back against the collective psyche of people, because we sort of hold certain things to be absolute pillars of our society. The COVID pandemic proved just how susceptible we are when those foundations change. And in this case, people always expect that the leader of their country will be here, they'll be available, they'll see their term through, and they're not going to disappear or die in office, which is just kind of silly when you think about it. We've kind of been pretty lucky that this has only occurred once.
The importance of the man to the people of Australia inspired questions about misconduct surrounding his well-being. Some theories are worth expecting, despite some being of outlandish assertions. Rumours at the time persisted of the possibility of suicide, to the point where Cabinet member Doug Anthony spoke out about Holt's depression shortly before his death as justification. Such claims were thoroughly rejected by Harold's son, Sam Holt, biographer Tom Frame, and former Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser, who was a member of the Cabinet at the time and who knew Holt well. Could the disappearance be more sinister in nature?
I think it's a valid point, though, raising the question, could this have been potentially a suicide? Holt was told not to go swimming. Holt was also on some heavy anti-pain medication. He wasn't at full strength, and he knew that Cheviot Beach could be a dangerous beach. People asked the question, was he depressed? Some people said that Holt was very often depressed, but I would imagine leaders in those positions of power would often find that they become a bit melancholy, just because of the nature of their work. But it is a possibility that I don't think is so outside the realm.
Another theory was raised in a letter after his death. It suggested that Holt was under the influence of a slow-release drug hidden in refreshments picked up on the way to the beach. As no others in the party reported ill effects, this idea can be debunked almost immediately, but the possibility of ill effects caused by narcotics cannot be completely ruled out. Holt was prescribed painkillers for his niggling shoulder injury. No doubt this medication impaired his function in some capacity and could be a contributing factor to his disappearance.
Yeah, basically the idea of he was hopped up on morphine, already had a weakened shoulder, and basically didn't have the capacity to be able to fight off turbulent ocean conditions. One of the things that's infamous here in Australia is going out to the beach, getting caught in a rip, and very unfortunately dying. Some of the best swimmers at their full strength can get caught in rips and can end up drowning. So someone like Holt, who was, starting to get on in years, shoulder injury, wasn't as strong a swimmer as he could be, and was also dealing with some drugs in his system, sort of says that maybe he was being a bit negligent with his own safety, or maybe being a bit oblivious to what he could actually do.
The world around this time also became increasingly violent. There was an attempt to assassinate the leader of the opposition, Arthur Calwell, by a student who disagreed with his pro-war stance. After Holt's disappearance, police found what appeared to be a bullet hole in Holt's office, bolstering the assassination theory. Holt was known to shirk bodyguards on his vacations, citing privacy concerns. His wife...
He wanted to fuck about. Literally.
His wife said it was so he could more easily hide his affairs from the general public. Matthew's making a satisfied face. However, this lack of protection for Holt could have left him vulnerable to a potential attack.
Spirited, charming, adventurous, and many said handsome. The Prime Minister was, according to his widow, Dame Zara, having affairs everywhere during the couple's 21-year marriage.
That comes from Sharp in 2013. Gary Simmons, however, would be the first to tell you that all of the above theories are hogwash. He asserts that, as part of a naval diving team,
I took Harold Holt's body from his home out to a waiting fishing boat the night before he was reported missing around midday on the 17th of December, 1967, while swimming at Cheviot Beach.
And that comes from Simmons, 2008. Simmons claims that due to Holt's stance against American surveillance posts like Pine Gap, Holt was a target for assassination by the Americans. Simmons has signed affidavits to that effect in both the Brisbane Supreme Court and in the Victorian Supreme Court.
Now, just before we continue on with this, any crazy person can sign a statutory declaration. It happens more often than you would think. So, right now I could say I absolutely understand that there are giant spiders living underground in Australia that are actually the ruling class and are preparing to eat babies, right? I could say that. I could write that in a document and I could sign that as a statutory declaration. Unless someone is prepared to legally challenge me, with which in most cases they're not going to, a stat dec is pointless unless it is challenged. No one is going to challenge this man because it's going to build his notoriety. It is a hell of a claim to make.
He goes on to suggest that during a surgical procedure, devices were implanted in Holt by a clandestine outfit operated by the Americans and/or forces unknown. Simmons has harassed politicians since at least 1999 about his theory of the death and cover-up of Harold Holt. In fact-checking Simmons' claims, we found that one G.A. Simmons is listed in a database of Australian Navy clearance divers from 1957. Clearance divers were originally employed to make shipping lanes safer for the vessels through the use of explosives. Speculations were put forward that due to Simmons' high-pressure work, if he is indeed the G.A. Simmons listed, he could be suffering from undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, which has led to his delusions concerning Harold Holt.
Yeah, people who have to remove explosives are under high pressure all the time. So you could imagine that doing such a job like that is going to lead to a bit of PTSD, which also could have, maybe muddled up this guy a little bit.
Regardless, this isn't even the most peculiar of the theories put forward to explain Holt's disappearance. In 1983, Anthony Gray theorised that Holt was possibly a spy for the Chinese government, and during Holt's swim at Cheviot Beach, a Chinese submarine collected Holt to return him to China.
The most likeliest of scenarios right here.
As one would expect, this theory was widely ridiculed. Zara Holt said it was ridiculous, with her evidence stating that not only did Holt not enjoy working with China,
just that this piece of quote-unquote evidence is something that I still chuckle at today.
but that he didn't even like Chinese food.
And so he wouldn't have been a spy for China. Now, the most logical explanation here is an acting prime minister most likely would not be a spy for a foreign country. I'm not saying it's outside the realm of possibility, but considering how many eyes and ears are on that person every single day, it is very, very unlikely. However, his widow turned around and said, well, he doesn't really like Chinese food, so I don't think he would have jumped into a Chinese submarine and then been taken to mainland China. Also, why would they retrieve a spy that's currently positioned in the government? Because then you lose your spy, essentially, don't you, Holly?
Yeah. As an aside, Australia has some of the best Chinese restaurants in the world.
So good.
And has been actually a staple of Australian culture since before the Eureka Stockade in 1856.
Yeah, Friday night for us used to be go get Chinese night. It was a very special occasion to have Chinese food.
Chinese. I want some Chinese now. So Holt was actually really missing out if he went back to China. The idea that a national leader, a social reformer and a war veteran could just vanish without a trace is unimaginable by modern standards. Our current Prime Minister is afforded numerous security measures to ensure his safety and well-being, But Harold Holt's Australia was vastly different from our own. The concepts of terrorism and the reality of assassination had not yet touched Australian shores, in spite of the assassination of US President John Kennedy less than 3 years prior to Holt's disappearance. What is so strange about the disappearance of Harold Holt is the disregard the man appeared to harbour for his own life and the responsibility of ensuring the continuation of his government. It could be that Holt was an arrogant man who brushed aside challenges like an injured shoulder or life-threatening surf. This may be why modern Australians find the disappearance of one of our best prime ministers so egregious. We just can't fathom the idea that someone of even moderate power in the Australian government would go anywhere without a dozen bodyguards and a camera on them at all times.
And that is our episode, well, our redo of the disappearance of Harold Holt. I hope you've enjoyed that. We have actually included, as part of this brand new file, the original episode, which we are going to play for you after I do a quick little spiel. So if you'd like to see just how far we've come to do a compare and contrast, you get the privilege right now, and I guarantee it is going to be absolutely awful, but you may get a chuckle in there every now and again.
It's almost an hour long, and it's not worth the listen. It's not.
But it's
skip to the next one.
It's there for prosperity's sake as we continue to evolve. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for giving us the chance to introduce you into the wonderful world of Weird Crap in Australia. If you would like to keep the conversation going, you can find us on social media. We are the Weird Crap in Australia podcast on Facebook, same name on Instagram, Weird Crap in Australia. You can also find us hanging out on Twitter. Our handle is at Weird Crap in Australia. You can also help support the show if you so choose. You can find us on Patreon. Just type in weirdcrapinaustralia.com. They'll take you straight to our Patreon account. For $1 a month, you can participate in our Patreon Selects episodes. That's where our Patreon subscribers select one topic that we offer, and we turn that into an episode. You essentially get to be a producer of the show. That's only $1 a month. And for $5 a month, that gives you access to our bonus minisodes as well as audiobook chapters, very similar to what you heard today, because we used our chapter from We Crap in Australia Volume 1 in order to produce this episode. And that leads me to talk about our book series. Another way you can support us for physical copies of We Crap in Australia Volume 1 and 2, you can head to lulu.com and our great mates at impactcomics.com.au to pick up the paperback edition. You can also grab it from the Kindle store in the ebook version. And we have We Crap in Australia Volume 3 coming out in September. We release a new volume of the book every September 1st. So no matter when you're listening to this, there is going to be a new edition of the book coming out in September. So we go year to year to year. So every book is 1 year of subjects from the Weird Crap in Australia podcast. And if you'd like to grab some Weird Crap in Australia merch, head to our Redbubble store, weirdcrapinaus.redbubble.com. You can grab yourself all manner of things from t-shirts to mugs, and they have all been designed by the wonderful Ignacio Di Meglio, who I work with not only on Weird Crap in Australia, but also our comic book, Killaroo Semper Fidelius, which you can also pick up from killaroo.com.
Aurelius Award nominated.
Aurelius, I keep forgetting that. I've recently been nominated for a writing award. How exciting is that? So you can check out all of our books. Thank you so much for jumping in. We hope that you enjoy the next 200 odd episodes. We plan to continue this for some time, and
episode 400 we'll redo number 2.
we will and as is customary, of course, as you will go on to learn, we give Holly the final words.
Every link that you're about to hear in the next dozen or so episodes, ignore them. They're probably wrong. Just go back to this one and listen to it, because those are the ones that we're actually using now.
And now, without further ado, the original Weird Crap in Australia Volume 1 episode.
Episode 1.
The Disappearance of Harold Holt, which we recorded in the year
2018.
2018.
It was the late April 2018, so almost exactly 5 years ago.
Enjoy listening to Matthew and Holly from 5 years ago attempting to create a podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you for the next 200 episodes. Bye for now.
Cringe with you later.